Today, we're going to talk about risk mitigation in the energy system, how Canada should reduce its risk. And I think it's very interesting to me that nobody ever talks about this. They all talk as if, we're going to be an energy superpower, we're going to build pipelines, we're going to expand oil production and LNG production, on and on and on. We're going to expand our revenue. And nobody ever thinks that during a time of intense change in the global energy system, in the middle of an energy transition, that maybe we should think about the risks of that.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Like, almost guarantee we're looking at a period where fossil fuel volumes and prices are going to get very volatile, even without wars and what have you, as demand goes down and there's mismatches between supply and demand. And that, that kind of volatility and spike can be an opportunity, but it can be big risk exposure as well going down.
Yeah, that's especially true in Canada because most of our oil that we export is bitumen from the Alberta, the ultra heavy sour crude from the Alberta oil sands, and there's a limited market for that. And what happens when demand starts to go down and you've got 103 million barrels a day of production and another 5 million barrels a day of spare capacity, production
Hmm.
capacity that OPEC has taken out of the market. And the IEA is saying by 2030 there'll be 114 million barrels a day of production capacity for 103 million barrels a day of demand. That doesn't scream high prices to me.
No, I yeah, it's we don't know how this is all going to. It's somewhat predictable how this is going to evolve, and to a certain degree, certain actors are pushing the agenda, right? Like the Chinese 5-year plans and all the companies and the directionality there. Like, transport demand for crude oil is going to fall. The speed of it is another question, right? Like passenger vehicles, probably quite quickly. Freight, a little bit slower. For chemical products, there's gonna be a long tail there, right? But it's like how we adapt to that is going to be the question. Like, and we're not in control of that, right? But we can prepare ourselves so that we have a nice, smooth transition to the latter half of this century.
But it seems like Canada's strategy here is the opposite of what would lead to a nice, smooth transition.
Well, it all depends on what you call Canada's strategy. Like, we're a whole bustling group of people, and disparate interests. They all think, what's the better future for Canada? The problem is we have a very narrow discussion about what that future looks like. And for some reason, we're spending 80% of that time talking about Northern Gateway, like another pipeline to the West Coast or to Churchill or what have you. But there's a whole broad swath of possibilities here, right? And I'll put this on the table. We keep talking about ourselves as an energy superpower, thinking back to crude oil production, thinking back to like cheap hydro, what have you. What happens if we're not the energy superpower later on in the century? What if the energy superpowers are those with huge amounts of surplus solar to put on the market, such as Morocco, such as Saudi Arabia, but northern Africa, what have you there? If you say they have stable governments and stable investment environments, they've got and solar more than 5 watts per meter squared. They'll be making ammonia, they'll be making hydrogen, they'll be making synthetic fuels. They can put all that surplus to their needs. They can put that on the market. It may be their screen superpower era that we're responding to with our own investments today.
After my interview with Chris, I spoke with Adam Dorr of ReThinkX about how military and geopolitical conflicts, like the war between Israel and Iran, raises the perception of risk by countries thinking about transitioning from oil and gas imports to electrifying their economies by importing assets like solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, and electric vehicles. This is an important global perspective that we seldom discuss in Canada, but really should before we grow oil production and build more pipelines that could become very expensive stranded assets.
It's very straightforward. The if you needed another reason to adopt solar, wind, and batteries as the basis of your future energy system, this is another very good reason. Geopolitical conflict fosters uncertainty and risk, and that has to be priced into anything that's coming through trade with a region that is unstable. It is a fairly simple logic at that superficial level. If we don't know from one day to the next, 1 week to the next, 1 month to the next, how secure the supply of a crucial resource is, that has to be priced in to that resource. And the more expensive something is, the more attractive its alternatives will become. The economic logic here is just overwhelming. The energy technologies in solar, wind, and batteries offer an overwhelmingly competitive value proposition for new builds already today. That only becomes an even more overwhelming value proposition, competitive with the older technologies based on fossil fuels primarily, when you price in the risk. Now, is there more to say? Sure.
Let me throw a little wrinkle in here, because there's a lot of discussion now about China's control over critical mineral supply chains, rare earth supply chains, that sort of thing. The fact that, 75, 80, maybe 90% of the smelting and refining of critical minerals to make battery metals is located in China, which introduces an element of risk, because countries and companies always like to have, options when it comes. They don't like to be reliant on one supplier. But it seems to me that there's a wrinkle here, and that is, once I buy it, I don't have to buy it again. Even if somewhere down the road that, country, like if China says, hey, we're not going to sell you solar panels for geopolitical reasons, that's okay. I've got what I've already had, and I'll go find another supplier then. And so the risk on the SWB side seems to be less than it is on the oil and gas side.
Oh, that's absolutely correct. And you put your finger on one of, I would say, are two key reasons. The first one, which you mentioned, is that if you have an energy system that is based on a stock of assets, overwhelmingly a stock of assets, and not on the flow, a continuous inflow of inputs into that system, then this is a far more secure basis for that system from the ground up, from its foundation. It is more secure, more stable, more resilient, and has a number of other advantages. Our recent research has talked about this in depth. So a stock or a stockpile asset-based system has enormous advantages over a flow-based or an input-based system. Okay, that's number one. And that's exactly correct. When it comes to solar, wind, and batteries, you're talking about amassing a stockpile. The second is that although there are resource bottlenecks for the build-out of the assets that comprise solar, wind, and batteries, those bottlenecks can be alleviated with investment, because the raw materials, the resources we're talking about, certain what are called, a little bit misleadingly, rare earth elements, those can be obtained from other sources. There are alternative sourcing options available for the inputs, I should say more accurately, for the raw materials that go into building the assets of solar, wind, and batteries energy systems. We're already seeing this. We're already seeing expansion of the mining base and the refinery base for those key materials in North America, for example. And this is something that has been a strategic priority going back a number of years. So this is a well-known concern. With oil, with petroleum, with natural gas, our options are much more limited. Those resources really are narrowly concentrated in just a few geographic areas relative to, for example, the abundance of metal ores from which you could obtain the key constituents needed to build solar, wind, and batteries. So it's not an apples to apples comparison by any stretch. It really is an apples to oranges comparison. And again, solar, wind, batteries, they come out on top in terms of the advantages.